So, as we continue on this third week of this series called Let's Taco Bout It, I'll be eventually going to be done saying that. We're going to be a little bit corny. We're going to have some fun with this because we're talking about something that's incredibly important to talk about. Something that we all experience, something that we all have, which are relationships. And relationships, much like tacos, can be delicious. They can be wonderful. But they also can be very, very messy. You know, it's not necessarily a meal that you take on the road, right? You don't eat tacos on the road. If you do, I want to see your car. It's probably a mess. Amen. But they are messy, aren't they? There's stuff that comes with this. Why are they messy? Because we're different. There's people who are coming from different backgrounds, people from different thoughts and beliefs that come together to form a relationship with one another. And there's opinions and there's attitudes and there's expectations that are completely different. And so, of course, it's going to be messy. And we thought about it and we decided that we need to talk about it. I can't say it right. I tried to. I just can't say taco about it. There you go. Did I get it that time? Thank you. All right, awesome. But we decided we need to talk about it. We need to have conversations about something that's incredibly, incredibly important. So over these weeks, we've already began to discuss. We talked about our communication with one another, which is messy. We talked about how we handle conflict with one another, which is messy. And today we are going to talk about something that is messy. And it is a hard conversation to have, but we are going to talk about commitment to one another. Ugh. Felt like the air just got sucked out of the room. What? Because let's be honest, if we're ever going to experience what God's best is for our life, for the relationships that we are in, we have to understand that even though relationships are messy, all kinds of relationships, even though they're messy, the better relationships that we have. This is the thing that we need to buy into, is the quality of our lives is continually determined by the quality of our relationships. The quality of our life is really determined by the quality of the relationships that we have. I mean, when you think about it, think about much of what makes life great is great relationships. Much of what makes life enjoyable is having a great relationship with our family, with our friends, with a spouse, with a mentor, a neighbor, a coworker. This is what makes life is great when we have great people around us, right? Life is exciting. It gives us life. On the other side of it, though, too, we know that life is draining when we don't have great relationships. It's hard. It's difficult. The more quality relationships we have, the better our life is. So with that in mind, I think it's important that we see the difference between ordinary relationships and extraordinary relationships, right? And you know it, right? You see the difference between the run-of-the-mill type of relationship, an ordinary relationship, looks like every other relationship, in an extraordinary relationship. Whether it's a marriage or whether it's friendship or whether it's family, you know the difference, right? When you see somebody else in the relationship, it just sticks out, right? There is a big difference between ordinary and extraordinary. So let's talk about the difference between those things. And for the sake of our life that we're trying to build, I think it's important that we do have this conversation. We do distinguish the difference, because the quality of our relationships, if we begin to pursue after a great quality in our relationships, we will begin to experience the life that God has intended for us, the fullness and the abundance that He promises for us. So with that in mind, primarily there's two different types of relationships in this world. I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but there's really two types of relationships. There's contract relationships and there's covenant relationships. There's two different ones. Not a whole lot in between. Contract relationships and covenant relationships. And we'll get to these more into these in a bit. But before we get there, I think it's really important for us to understand, before we go to that and just beginning to distinguish those, it's important to understand that Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, that God intended, desired for us to have quality relationships with one another. It's been a big desire. for him. In fact, we see this with Jesus and speaking about the quality relationships. This idea that the quality relationships are covenant relationships. We'll explain that here. We see that at the last meal that Jesus had, the last opportunity he had with his closest, while he was here on earth in human form, in natural form, his experience with them, this last opportunity he has with those closest to him, he began to share something that was incredibly important, that he was going to offer them an opportunity to understand that there's something deeper to what he was doing in this. And you see it in Luke 22, verse 20. In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." Now, when you hear that, it may not ring naturally to you, but what I think is if we take a moment and just think about the idea that what Jesus is offering in this moment, there's a covenant that's been made, a promise that has been made, but he's offering this new covenant into something greater, something better, and he expresses it in himself that he will be poured out. And as we think about that, in these hours just before he's about to give his life as a sacrifice, to lay down his friends, he speaks of this more meaningful, extraordinary type of relationship that he's offering, that he wants to offer to those that are around him, that he desires to have with those in the room with him that day. The opportunity that he was going to offer for others that were around him and those that are to come. It's a conversation about the quality of the relationship he had with each disciple in that room that day. A conversation about moving from this contractual and conventional relationship that's ordinary, that's seen all around. Everybody has these relationships, to a covenant relationship, to something deeper, to something more meaningful. And maybe today, right now, at this moment, you're probably asking, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between a covenant relationship and a contract relationship? Well, let's start here. Let's go through a couple of these things. And for us to understand, covenant, when we think of the word covenant, it's based on a mutual commitment. Contract is based on mutual distrust. See, covenants are made with a mutual understanding, with a mutual meaning that we both agree to commit. We commit to something more meaningful. There's more to it. Contracts are needed, well, let's be honest, when we don't have trust that somebody's going to fulfill their end of the agreement. That's why contracts are made, right? We don't sign contracts. Contracts aren't made because we're like, you know what, I trust you a whole lot, so let me just sign this right here. A handshake should be enough if that were the case. Contracts are made because I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure you're going to fulfill your end of the agreement, so I need a way out. So covenant surrenders rights and assumes responsibility. Contracts protect rights and shirks responsibilities. Covenants are mutually responsible. Understanding that it doesn't fall on one party. Both parties see that they are equally responsible in the relationship. They're not waiting on the other half to show up and do what they said they were going to do, but they do their part. Contract has protection rights and shirks responsibilities, where contracts protects rights of the individuals and seeks to minimize personal responsibility or commitments. Other words, I'll hold up my end of the bargain if you hold up your end of the bargain. That's a contract. There's a difference. How about the covenant has the interest of the other in mind? Contract has personal convenience in mind. Covenants are humble in nature. They're about mutual love and respect for one another, for the other party. Where a contract is, well, we sign a contract to protect ourselves. There's self-protection that's in place. We want to make sure that we're seeking my best interest and focused on preserving my convenience. Those are what contracts are about. Now, here's the deal. When we begin to talk about these in relationships, does that mean that every contract relationship doesn't work? No. There can be contract relationships that are good, but based on the words of Jesus, the best version of relationship is covenant over contract. It's what he was willing to demonstrate and exemplify while he was here on earth. And so this is where we begin to make a shift. We make a shift from what ordinary is, which is contractual. You do what you do your part, and I'll do my part. That's normal. That's easy. That's what we expect in this life. That's what we're willing to offer. Extraordinary is I'm going to do my part, whether you do yours or not. I'm going to hold up my end of the bargain. And this is a big deal. This is a big deal. This is why Paul, the apostle, writes to the church in Rome when he says this. How do we do this? He says it this way: let love be genuine. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peacefully with all. See, Paul, he writes to the church. He writes to the church in Rome, and he's saying, hey, listen, this is what it's supposed to look like. This is how we are asked to be able to live. This is how we're being asked to live and care for our relationships. He's describing what a covenant relationship looks like. The covenant relationships are built on genuine love. Genuine love. It's built on outdoing one another in honor. Covenant relationships are built on contributing to the needs of the others. Covenant relationships are built on living in harmony with each other. They're built on humility. They're built on giving thought to what would be honorable, actually thinking about how we can honor one another. He's saying, we hear this list, and it's easy to see these. These seem, I would really like to have this, right? I would love to have somebody in my life. I would love to have someone in my life that would honor these things, that would do these things, that would have genuine love for me, that would want to outdo me in honor, that would want to contribute to my needs. I would love to have somebody who would choose to live in harmony with me. I would love to have this. We can agree, right? That sounds good, doesn't it? Seems like a great relationship to have, that somebody would provide these things for me. But let's be honest. Not everybody wants to do these things. We don't necessarily want to do these things. But somebody has to start it. Somebody has to take the first step in honoring one another. Somebody has to take the first step in genuinely loving someone. Someone has to take these first steps. So with that in mind, knowing that this Jesus cares greatly about this, Paul wrote about this. Entire scripture, every piece of this points directly to this idea of covenant relationships being a big deal. How? How do we build and maintain covenant relationships in our lives? How do we go from just ordinary, run-of-the-mill relationships that we can just walk out the door, we can turn on the television, we go down the road, and we can see these types of relationships, to something that is extraordinary? There's something that isn't the run-of-the-mill, something that is different, something that honors Jesus, that honors God's design for all of creation. How do we do this? I have a few ideas. I believe there's a few things that we can do. So let's start here with this first thing. The first place that we can start is be all about the win-win situation. Be all about the win-win situation. Be all about the fact that it's not just about me, that I'm not the only one that wins. Because let's be honest, we get into relationships because we want to win, don't we? We want to feel good. We want to experience what this love has to offer. We want to win. But what if we changed our mindset that it wasn't about me, but it was about somebody else? Everybody would win. What if we began to be all about that? Because here's the thing. Our emotions will trick us. They'll send us down a road. And guess what? Love, the genuine love, is not an emotion. Genuine love is not an emotion. Are there emotions that come with it that express love? You betcha. But genuine love is a choice that we make. It's a virtue that we carry. It's something that we desire, that we are wanting to show. We commit to pursue. When we have genuine love for one another, we genuinely pursue the win-win. And that's what will bring us together. We want to see everybody win in this. Genuine love means I'm all about your well-being. It's really quiet in here. Genuine love is about, I'm all about your well-being. And this starts from the beginning. This is genuine love. When we begin to read through this and see this through the eyes of God and what He's trying to tell us, Scripture is all about love, all about our well-being. It starts, we see it in Jesus. It starts with Jesus wanting something extraordinary for His friends, wanting something different for them, something that's not the run-of-the-mill, but something that is greater. He's given them this new covenant, this new opportunity, this new experience and relationship. He offers it for His friends then, and He offers it for His friends today, us. This covenant was made with the full knowledge. This covenant relationship was made with the full knowledge that it would take sacrifice to fulfill this covenant, that it would take Jesus' blood to be spilled for this covenant. And to those who receive this covenant, there would be an opportunity for an eternal, extraordinary relationship with the one who gave this covenant out. And all that would be asked of us, those who choose to receive that covenant that has been given, this relationship that's being offered by Jesus, all that's being asked of us is that we would be willing to do the same. That's a big deal. But that we would be willing to offer covenant relationships to those that are around us and offer our covenant to Christ Himself. See, Paul wrote to the Ephesians in describing what this looks like. He says, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. That there are things that we need to try to do. There's things that we need to put out there. That a genuine love, a genuine covenant relationship with someone isn't something that can be faked. Because these things are outside of ourselves. They're not ordinary, run-of-the-mill, but they are extraordinary. They're different. So, we'd be all about the win-win situation. The second thing that I think that we can begin to operate out of if we want to see our relationships be quality and filled in covenant relationships is that we would keep short accounts. That we wouldn't hold on to things. That we wouldn't keep a hold of those and bring those back out. But that we would do something that isn't of ourselves. That we would, because our natural would be, when somebody does me wrong, I'm going to hold on to that. In fact, Paul writes to the Colossians and he says this, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, he's saying to them, listen, I want you to remember who you are. I want you to remember what has been done for you. I want you to know that you are holy, you are dearly loved by the Creator of all things. So with that in mind, I want you to clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Things that aren't of ourselves. Things that there's internal work that has to take place for these things to begin to really show up. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. See, Jesus, the covenant that Jesus offered his friends that day was fully and completely rooted in forgiveness. Realizing that they had done wrong, but he was willing to forgive them. That he desired, that this was the very center of the relationship that they would have, that it would be rooted in forgiveness. So how do we do that? Because that's hard, right? Keeping short accounts, not keeping a list of all the things that have been done wrong to me is a hard thing to do. So what do we do? Well, the first thing I think that we need to do is we need to move on. Ooh, that's not very nice to say. But listen, I want you. Here's what I mean by move on. We need to let go the little things. That we don't let the small stuff begin to build up. That as soon as somebody does something that doesn't fit with my expectation, that I don't hold on to it and stick it in my pocket. But that I would let it go. That I wouldn't hold on to these things. There's wisdom in that. And we see this in Proverbs 19:11. It says, a person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. But there's good in overlooking these offenses, these small things, and we wouldn't just grab a hold of those and let those build up. And the next thing we can do is that we can move past. Listen, there's hurts that we have. There's been some very difficult, hard, painful, mean things that you have experienced probably in relationships. There's things that you have a hard time moving past, even if you're still in those relationships. Because we do hold grudges. We do have scorecards that we keep, that we pull out when we are offended once again. Like, you remember that? You remember that? You did that. But that we would be willing to move past those things. That we wouldn't have an IOU mentality, like, I'm going to get you. I'm going to bring that back up. Or you owe me. We scrap that. To have a covenant relationship, a quality relationship, one that is based on what Christ has done for us, we must be willing to move past. That we would honor Jesus' words in Luke when he says, do not judge and you will not be judged. Do not condemn and you will not be condemned. Forgive and you will be forgiven. That if we want to experience quality relationships, we have to be willing to move past the hurts and the hang-ups that we have. And once we move past them, what we have to do is then we have to move forward. We need to move forward and realize I'm not owed anything by them. They don't owe me anything. That the only debt that I owe, because I owe them something. If I'm a follower of Jesus, if I received the covenant that he lived out by giving up his life for me and forgiving me, then I must be willing to do this. That the only debt that I have in a relationship to someone else is to love them. It's to love them. Listen to this in Romans chapter 13, verse 8. It says, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For he who loves his fellow man has fulfilled the law. We have done what has been asked of us when we continue to serve the debt that we owe, which is to love one another. To love one another. So let me ask you this. Have you heard this quote before? Yesterday is history. Tomorrow's a mystery. But today is a gift. That's why it's called a present. See, when we begin to think about the idea of moving forward, not looking back, not even necessarily looking ahead, when we begin to look at that, the idea that we would begin to understand that yesterday and tomorrow are not debts to be paid or to reconcile. That's not what they're there for. The only debt that we have is a covenant relationship. In a covenant relationship is to love each other today. In this moment. Not previously, but right now. this is the debt that we owe. If we're choosing to take a covenant relationship with somebody, if we want a quality relationship with somebody, we're saying right here, right now, I'm going to love you, even if you're not loving me back. I didn't say it was going to be easy. But what's amazing is these types of relationships are life-giving relationships. They're not filled with burden. They're not filled with baggage. They're not filled with weight. We're easily to travel. It's easy to do things. It's filled with laughter and love and care. Are there difficulties? Sure. But there's something different about these types of relationships. Why? Because they move on. They don't sweat the small stuff. They move past. They don't hold grudges. Then they move forward. They understand that genuine love today is the only debt that we have to one another. To love each other today. So think about this. Could you imagine the difference that it would have in our relationships? Those relationships that we have with our loved ones, could you imagine what a difference this would make with the people that we're surrounded by? Our spouses, our family, our friendships. That if we were far less focused on the yesterdays and tomorrows, that we'd be far more focused on the debt of genuine love today. Can you imagine the difference that this would make? If the only debt that we had to each other was our love for each other today, listen, and you're going, that's a lot. There's a lot of people. Obviously, you can't do this for everyone. This isn't something that you can do for everyone. In person, Jesus only did this for a few. But this is something that we can do, this is what gives life to this, is that we can have this, that this is a possible thing in our lives. And it's possible because of what Jesus did. Because what he did, this is available to us. That there are a few that we can bring in, those that are close to us, those that we love dearly, those that are around us, that we can bring them in and we can have these covenant relationships with one another. So for the sake of living a quality life, we should seek to build as many of these quality, extraordinary relationships as we possibly can. Because that's life. That gives us life. That gives life to others. That's purpose in our life, to have these types of relationships. So when we commit to the win-win, when we keep short accounts, the next thing that we can do is we can commit to giving the better half. Now, you know there's always a better half, right? When anything's split, there's always a better half. Very rarely is there anything that ever goes 50-50, right? Like you've tore apart a bagel, right? Right? The donut that you want to split with your kid, they don't get the better half. Come on. You know that. Right? There are very, very rarely are there things in this life that there is a perfect 50-50. And there are never perfect 50-50 relationships. Ever. That one person would do their half and then you would do your half and you would just meet right there in the middle. Doesn't happen. It doesn't. Let's be real. Let's be honest. That's not what happens. There's always a better half. So what if we decided in our minds, if we took the stance that I am going to give the better half, that I'm always going to give the better half, that they may not deserve the better half, but I'm going to give the better half. What if we did this? There's a lot of people that are seeking these things, seeking these 50-50 relationships. They're looking for perfect balance, spending time, effort, and energy trying to balance these scorecards to make sure everything is lined up perfectly. But no one can do it. It takes us giving more of ourselves. So even if it feels balanced or it feels like we're equal today in what we're giving, I would just say give it time. Anybody who's been married for any extent of time would understand that. Right? Like just give time. It'll feel like the other person's not doing what they should be doing. The same thing with friendships. Certainly with coworkers, right? Like these are things, these are natural things. So why is that? Why would it be that way? God is so cool. You want to know why? Because he didn't intend for these to be contractual relationships. He meant for them to be covenant relationships. That we would give a sacrifice to one another. Because in a covenant, what you give cannot be motivated by what you receive in return. I want you to think about that. I want you to think about that. In a covenant, what you give isn't motivated by what you received. If it is, that's a contract. And that contract is going to get broken. I'm so grateful that Jesus didn't do that for me. That he was willing to offer a covenant. That regardless of whether I'd hold up my half, whether I would honor him in the way that he should be honored, that he still did his part to the fullest and more to offer the opportunity for me to have that relationship with him. He gave his life with no promise or of anything in return from us. He did it anyways. So his motivation to give wasn't based on what we were able to give back. Wasn't. It was made, the covenant that he took, the relationship, the sacrifice that he made was simply and totally for our benefit. For us. Whether we choose to reciprocate that or not. He was motivated by the possibility of how this kind of love would change our lives for the better. Forever. Giving because I'm getting, well, that's a contract. Giving with the motivation of getting, it's a contract. But giving with no promise of anything in return, that is genuine love. Genuine love. Paul explains a little more in Ephesians chapter 5. He says this, imitate God, therefore, in everything you do. Imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children. Live a life filled with love. Following the example of Christ, he loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God. Live a life filled with love. Follow the example of Christ, of Jesus. What does that look like? He loved us genuinely, not because we deserved it, but he loved us genuinely. So he took the position of sacrifice intentionally. He loved us so genuinely that he took that position of sacrifice. In a covenant, if there's ever a position of sacrifice that could be taken, we should be taking it. If you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, a lover of Jesus, of one saved by Jesus, who has been forgiven because of Jesus' sacrifice, when there's an opportunity to take sacrifice, we should take it. And we should do it joyfully. Because according to Paul and what Jesus desires, that is what genuine love looks like. That's what covenant love looks like. So it's not what have you done for me lately, it's what have I done for you lately. And it's not because of what we'll get in return. So when we treat other people like that, when we treat others like that, when we treat our families, when we treat our friends, when we treat our husbands, when we treat our wives, when we treat our kids, when we treat our neighbors, when we treat our coworkers, when we treat those that are near us, that may be dear to us, you know what happens? It turns people's heads. It causes people to stop. It causes people to go, what is going on? Why? Because it's not ordinary. It's extraordinary. It's different. It's not of this world. You're not going to find that in an ordinary relationship. That is a covenant. It's a covenant. It's extraordinary. And that's what Jesus wants for each and every one of us. That's why he lived it out. That's why his example was what it was, is that he gave his life as a ransom for us so that we could experience the opportunity to give of our lives, to pour out of our lives, to have a great relationship with those that are dear and near to us. That's why he did this, so that we can live this life to the fullest like it's supposed to. How much do you have to love someone to be willing and joyfully to take the position of sacrifice? It's love. It's love. And the truth is we desire that. I mean, we desire to receive that. But in us, what God created in us is a desire to give that as well. We just choose to show it through other ways, through other avenues. But he created that in us so that it would give life to us when we actually offer our lives for others. Everything changes for the better when a relationship between two people decide to willfully and joyfully take the position of sacrifice to each other. It makes us feel valuable. It makes us feel safe. It makes us feel special. It makes us feel loved. Our value is shown by what someone is willing to give and pay for it. Our value, each and every one of us, regardless of how you feel about yourself today, regardless of what your relationships may be showing to you or to those around you, your life is valuable enough for the Creator to give of His. There's no amount of money. There's no value that can be set on that. You're worth the sacrifice. But so is the person next to you. So the question I want to leave us with, for us to ponder and really begin to look internally to ourselves, would be this question. Am I going after God's best in my relationships? It's not for guilt or shame. It's for a place for us to start. A place for us to say, no, I'm ready for that. I'm ready for God's best in my relationship. But God's best in our relationship is asking for a sacrifice from us. So let me leave you with this scripture right here. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 17 says this: I pray that Christ will be more and more at home in your heart, living within you as you trust Him. May your roots go down deep into the soil of God's marvelous love. And may you be able to feel and understand how long, how wide, how deep, how high His love really is. And experience this love for yourselves. When we take on that prayer for others, when we really pray that for others, when we believe that for our relationships, we can't help but experience the love that God has poured out to us. So we have the opportunity not just to talk about our relationships, but do something with it. Sacrifice has been made on our behalf. The question for us is, are we willing to sacrifice for others because of that? We pray for you.